The sound of crystal glasses clinking and a woman shouting for more shrimp skewers was the first thing I heard when I pulled into my driveway. The second was the unmistakable growl of my dog Moose, watching a stranger set up a buffet table 6 inches from his favorite bathroom spot. I hadn't even turned off the truck when I saw her, Beatrice Holloway, queen of the HOA, standing on my front lawn in a sun hat the size of a satellite dish, directing a team of caterers like a 5-star general. My grass, which I'd just reseeded last week, was littered with folding chairs, linen-covered tables, and a full-on carving station manned by a guy in a chef's coat. The smell of roasted meat wafted through the spring air, but all I could taste was the bitterness of disbelief. I stepped out of the truck slowly, staring at the scene in front of me like I was watching my own property in a movie I hadn't agreed to star in. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough to cut through the chatter. Beatrice barely turned her head. She waved a hand in my direction like she was swatting a fly. "Oh, Ethan, you're home early. Don't worry, we'll be gone by 6. We just needed some open space for the buffet. Your lawn gets the best light." I blinked. Once, twice, then a third time, in case the sun had cooked my brain. "Beatrice, this is my property. You didn't ask." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, don't be dramatic. We're just borrowing it for a couple of hours. It's for my niece's bridal shower, and it's not like you were using it." At that exact moment, Moose and Pip padded up beside me. They'd both been inside, watching from the bay window, noses smudging the glass. Now that the door was open and the gate between them and their precious grass had been unlatched, they were on high alert. Moose, a beast of white fur and muscle, gave a low rumble. Pip, wiry and twitchy, locked eyes with a stack of napkins that had fluttered to the ground like prey. Beatrice noticed the dogs and narrowed her eyes. "Please keep those animals back. They'll shed all over the place. This is a high-end event." I knelt down, scratched behind Moose's ears, and looked him right in the eyes. "You feel like making some new friends today, buddy?" Beatrice's shriek cut through the air before the dogs even broke into a trot. Moose moved with slow, deliberate confidence, head low, tongue lolling, while Pip zigzagged ahead like a predator unleashed. They hit the table legs like furry bowling balls, and within 5 seconds, the shrimp skewers were airborne. One landed squarely on a guest's forehead. Another smacked the punch fountain with a comedic splash that soaked Beatrice from chin to chest. The catering guy backed away with his hands raised as Pip leaped onto a bench and grabbed a white silk table runner in her teeth. The tug-of-war began. Half the table's contents were yanked toward the barking chaos while guests shrieked and scattered. Moose, now carrying a full rotisserie chicken like a newborn baby, strolled across the grass as if inspecting his new kingdom. Beatrice lunged toward him, tripped over a chair leg, and face-planted into the spinach dip. I didn't even bother hiding my laughter. Someone shouted, "Oh my God, is that dog eating the wedding cake?" And I turned just in time to see Pip proudly dragging a 3-tiered monstrosity across the lawn like it was a kill to present to her pack. Moose joined in, clamping down on the other end, and the dogs joyfully tore it apart in front of 20 horrified guests and one speechless caterer. Beatrice stood up, face smeared with dip and mascara running like war paint. "You'll regret this," she shouted. "You'll pay for this." I crossed my arms and tilted my head. "You're trespassing, Beatrice. On my lawn. With your buffet table. And now you want to talk about consequences." She stormed off, screaming at her niece to gather the gifts while guests fled like the party had just been raided. By the time the last car peeled out of the driveway, Moose and Pip were lounging in the sun, bellies full, tails wagging. The grass was trashed, of course, but I'd take trampled sod and frosting-streaked dirt over being steamrolled by HOA royalty any day of the week. I walked back into the house, poured myself a cold lemonade, and looked out the window. My dogs were now sharing a roasted pork shank like it was a victory trophy. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. Beatrice never backed down from a grudge. But then again, neither did I. The next morning, my porch was decorated with a neon orange envelope duct taped to the front door, Beatrice's preferred way of delivering threats disguised as HOA notices. I didn't need to open it to know what it was about, but out of morbid curiosity, I peeled the thing off and unfolded the paper. As expected, it was an official complaint stating that my dogs had viciously attacked and destroyed a peaceful community event, and that I owed a $500 fine for damages and a mandatory behavior review for my pets. Behavior review? For dogs? The paper might as well have been written in crayon. Beatrice had clearly lost her mind. I made a fresh cup of coffee and sat on the porch swing, watching Moose and Pip nap in the sun like oversized paperweights. They didn't have a violent bone in their bodies, unless someone messed with their lawn or their owner. Pip's tongue stuck out slightly while she snored. Real menace, that one. I read through the rest of the complaint and almost choked on my coffee when I saw the list of damaged items. It included such gems as a pearl-handled cake knife valued at $350, custom champagne flutes from Italy, and emotional suffering due to exposure to aggressive canine behavior. She even had the audacity to itemize her dry cleaning costs. I set the notice aside and pulled up the footage on my phone. 2 weeks ago, I had installed high-resolution wildlife cameras to catch coyotes prowling near the back fence. What I hadn't expected was that the cameras captured crystal-clear, wide-angle footage of the entire buffet chaos. Beatrice was front and center, dragging coolers across my lawn and barking orders at the catering crew. My dogs didn't even appear until the halfway point, and when they did, it was after I'd opened the gate and let them onto my own property. They didn't growl, they didn't bite. They simply acted like dogs, curious, rowdy, and full of energy. There was no aggression, no threat, just gourmet carnage and justified mayhem. I knew right then what I had to do. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. That gave me 3 days to make copies of the footage, prepare a slideshow, and print some stills that highlighted just how far Beatrice had gone. I even found a frame-by-frame shot of her niece double-dipping shrimp cocktail and one of Beatrice herself knocking over the punch bowl in a frenzy of panic. I captioned it, "Beatrice's Calamity," and had it printed on a foam board at the local print shop. I figured if I was going to show up to the party, I might as well bring props. When Thursday rolled around, I walked into the HOA clubhouse with a smile on my face and a hard drive in my pocket. The room was packed. Word had spread quickly that something had gone down on my lawn, and everyone wanted the full story. Beatrice was already seated at the head of the table, dressed in a stiff blazer and tapping her pen like she was preparing to lead a military tribunal. She didn't even look at me as I entered. Good. I wasn't here for small talk. The board president, an older guy named Mr. Henderson, who mostly stayed out of HOA drama, cleared his throat and asked Beatrice to present her case. She stood up with a folder in hand, reciting the same exaggerated nonsense she'd written in her complaint letter. She claimed her guests had feared for their lives, that children had been traumatized, and that I had deliberately incited a dog riot to ruin a sacred family gathering. I waited until she finished her speech, then stood up without a word and plugged my hard drive into the projector. What followed was 15 minutes of silence punctuated by gasps, chuckles, and finally, full-blown laughter. The footage played in 1080p, showing Beatrice crossing onto my property, setting up tables, and barking commands at her crew. Then came the dogs. The crowd watched with wide eyes as Moose casually grabbed a rotisserie chicken and Pip yanked a table runner with the force of a rodeo champion. The best part came when Beatrice herself, in all her self-righteous glory, tripped over a chair and face-planted into the dip bowl. I paused the video at that moment and turned to the room. "I'd like the record to show," I said, "that my dogs didn't step one paw off my property. In fact, this entire event was trespassing, unauthorized, and well-documented." The boardroom broke into applause. Beatrice's face turned the color of steamed beets. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat again, trying to regain order. "Well," he said, glancing between Beatrice and me, "it seems there may have been a misrepresentation of the events. I think we'll need to dismiss this complaint and review Mrs. Holloway's conduct further." Beatrice stood up so fast her chair toppled. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "This isn't over. You humiliated me." I calmly picked up the foam board with her still frame, held it up, and replied, "No, Beatrice. You did that yourself. I just made it easier to see." The room erupted again, and this time Mr. Henderson didn't even try to stop the laughter. Beatrice grabbed her folder and stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door behind her hard enough to rattle the blinds. On my way out, 3 neighbors stopped to shake my hand. One of them, a quiet woman named Sarah Jenkins, leaned in and whispered, She did the same thing to me last year. Took over my backyard for a garden brunch and then blamed me when the sprinklers went off. Another neighbor, Michael Davies, mentioned she had a file of complaints Beatrice had fabricated to keep people in line. I told them to email everything to me. If Beatrice wanted a war, I'd come armed with footage, witnesses, and a pair of very photogenic dogs. As I pulled into my driveway later that night, Moose and Pip met me at the gate, their tails wagging. I gave each of them a biscuit, sat on the porch, and watched the stars blink overhead. I knew Beatrice. She wasn't going to let this go. She'd come back with something, another party, another bogus complaint, maybe even some petty form of revenge. But she didn't know that I'd been documenting everything for years, and now the entire neighborhood had seen what she was really like. I wasn't just dealing with a neighbor anymore. I was dealing with a public nuisance in Pearls. And it was time someone shut her down. It was 3 quiet days before Beatrice struck again, and when she did, it was so on-brand that I nearly applauded. I woke up on Sunday morning to the smell of grilled meat and the sound of laughter echoing across the field. At first, I thought it was my neighbors holding a cookout. Then I walked out to feed the chickens and stopped dead in my tracks. There it was, a full picnic setup, hovering right at the edge of my lawn. Not on it this time, but skimming the boundary line like a bad idea with a measuring tape. Beatrice had returned, and this time she brought more chairs, more food, and a bouncy castle for the kids. She had even hung paper lanterns on my fence like it was her personal party wall. I stood there for a minute, processing the scene. A man I didn't recognize was flipping burgers next to my property marker. A group of kids ran back and forth, shouting about juice boxes and hot dogs. And right in the middle of it all stood Beatrice, wearing a wide grin like none of the last week had happened. She looked up, made eye contact with me, and waved like we were old friends at a barbecue. I raised an eyebrow and walked toward the fence. "Morning," she said cheerfully. "Lovely day for a little neighborhood bonding, isn't it?" I ignored the saccharine tone in her voice. "You're parked 6 inches from my land again, Beatrice. Just letting you know." She chuckled. "Oh, don't be so uptight. It's technically not on your grass this time. It's all public access until the property line cuts in. Check the zoning code." I did. I had. She was right. Technically, the picnic was on the HOA-owned easement that wrapped the border of my property. It was a legal gray area that was rarely used for anything other than weeds and rabbit trails. But now it was a war zone of potato salad and propane tanks. Moose and Pip were already pacing along the fence, sniffing the air, tails stiff and ears pointed. They knew something was up. They remembered the buffet. I crouched beside them, gave them a pat, and told them to stay put for now. As tempting as it was to let them start round 2, I needed to do this right. No chaos, no yelling, just clean, precise retaliation. That evening, after the picnic crowd thinned and Beatrice left with a final smug smile, I made a few phone calls. The first was to Jessica, the local animal shelter coordinator, who also happened to be Beatrice's niece, the same niece who had faceplanted into the deviled eggs during the bridal shower. She was sweet, kind, and clearly had no idea her aunt had blamed the entire dog incident on me and accused my dogs of being dangerous. When I told her everything, she was horrified. She said Beatrice had made up similar lies about other neighbors, even going so far as to anonymously report one for animal hoarding just because their cat had gotten out once. Jessica agreed to help. The shelter was planning a weekend fundraiser, and she said it would be the perfect chance to show the community the truth about my dogs and maybe raise some money for rescues while we were at it. We came up with a plan, and within 48 hours, flyers were printed, calls were made, and a local news outlet agreed to cover the event. The name we picked for the fundraiser was Poetic Justice, Paws and Justice, a dog fun day complete with obstacle courses, grooming booths, adoption drives, and best of all, it would be held right on my front lawn. Saturday came fast, and the event was a hit. My driveway was lined with cars, and families streamed in carrying leashes, folding chairs, and bags of dog treats. There were bouncy balls, agility ramps, splash tubs, and even a dog-kissing booth. Moose wore a red bow tie. Pip had a pink one with sparkles. They soaked up the attention like celebrities, posing for photos and stealing snacks from toddlers. Kids giggled, adults mingled. It was loud, joyful, and peaceful, until Beatrice showed up. She came strutting down the road, arms folded, sunglasses perched on her nose, and a look of calculated rage simmering just beneath the surface. She stopped at the edge of my lawn, clearly trying to figure out if she could accuse me of anything. Her eyes scanned the setup, the tents, the signage, and then landed on the news anchor setting up her mic. Her mouth twitched. She took a step forward, just as someone shouted, "Look out." Too late. A golden retriever puppy barreled past the food tent, dragging a leash behind it. Beatrice turned just in time for the puppy to leap onto her sandals, knocking her off balance. She slipped backwards, arms flailing, and landed squarely in the kiddie pool filled with kibble and plastic bones. There was a collective gasp, followed by silence, and then a dozen people burst into laughter. The cameraman caught every frame. Beatrice sputtered, tried to stand, slipped again, and finally crawled out of the pool, dripping dog chow and fury. She turned to me with pure venom in her eyes and shouted, "This is harassment. This is targeted sabotage." I shook my head slowly. "You're the one who came onto my lawn again, Beatrice. You're lucky that puppy didn't file an assault claim." The reporter walked over, microphone ready, and asked her, "Would you like to comment on the success of this community dog event, ma'am?" Beatrice just glared, eyes wild with humiliation. She muttered something unintelligible and stomped off, soaking wet and covered in bits of kibble. People whispered, some pulled out their phones. Jessica walked up beside me and handed me a lemonade. "You think she'll ever stop?" I asked. Jessica smiled. "Probably not. But at least now the whole neighborhood knows what she's like. And your dogs get to be the heroes." I looked over at Moose, who was busy getting belly rubs from a group of kids. Pip had somehow found another piece of cake and was gnawing it triumphantly under a bench. By the time the event wrapped up, we had raised over $1,200 for the shelter and signed up 3 people for adoption appointments. The news segment aired that night, and the highlight reel of Beatrice falling into the kibble pool ran twice, with playful commentary. People loved it. The footage went semi-viral locally, and the HOA inbox flooded with both support and requests to remove Beatrice from the board. As I cleaned up the yard, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't bracing for Beatrice's next stunt. I knew she wasn't done, not by a long shot. But now the tide had turned. The community had seen the truth, and my dogs had gone from villains to local legends. It wasn't revenge, it was revelation. And I was just getting started. The day after the flyers went up, the phone call started. First, it was the HOA secretary, Linda, asking if I had obtained proper permits for a public gathering. Then it was a man claiming to be a city inspector, wanting to verify that I wasn't charging for parking or selling food without a license. Both conversations had Beatrice's fingerprints all over them. Her style was always the same. Find the rule book, rip out the page that suited her, and slam it down like a winning card. What she didn't realize was that I'd already talked to the shelter, and we were coordinating everything through their nonprofit status. The event was not only permitted but insured, and the local news station had already confirmed they were coming with a camera crew. She was swinging blindly, hoping one punch would land. Around noon, I noticed a car slowly circling the property. It was Beatrice's silver Lexus, crawling like a crocodile in tall grass. I stayed on the porch, sipping iced tea with Pip curled up at my feet. Beatrice didn't get out. She just stared through the windshield, her jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might snap. Then she peeled off down the road, tires screeching, leaving behind a puff of petty exhaust. I figured that would be the end of it for the day. But of course it wasn't. That night, my power flickered off at 9:17 p.m. Sharp. No storm, no construction, just gone. The rest of the neighborhood had lights. Only my house was dark. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, and headed straight to the generator out back. Everything looked intact, no chew marks, no blown fuses. Then I spotted it, a fresh set of boot prints in the dirt leading straight to the breaker box. The lock was hanging loose, broken clean through like someone had hit it with a crowbar. I took pictures and filed a police report, but I already knew how it would go. With no footage of the actual act and no prints on the metal, it would be chalked up as vandalism. I installed a temporary lock and rerouted the backup power to cover the next few days. Beatrice wanted disruption, and all she managed was inconvenience. The next morning, I stopped by the HOA office to file an official complaint of my own. Linda, always polite and overly caffeinated, looked uncomfortable as she handed me a thick folder that had my name on the tab. It was Beatrice's file. She'd been submitting documents almost daily since the buffet incident. Photos of my dogs behind the fence, printed screenshots from neighborhood forums, blurry images that looked like she was trying to catch me violating landscaping code by leaving a wheelbarrow near the porch. It was a textbook harassment campaign. I submitted my own folder in return. It included signed statements from Sarah Jenkins, Michael Davies, and 3 other neighbors who'd dealt with her antics. I attached screenshots of the Facebook posts where she'd openly discussed using HOA fines as tools of order. I printed out the police report from the generator incident, the photos of the boot prints, and a note from the shelter verifying the upcoming event's legality. Linda scanned every page and nodded solemnly. "You're not the first one," she said under her breath. "But you might be the last." I left that office knowing I'd shifted the balance. 2 days later, it happened. I got a certified letter at the door. Beatrice had officially filed a lawsuit. She was claiming emotional distress, character defamation, and violation of HOA decorum. She accused me of malicious public shaming and using aggressive animals as weapons in a neighborhood dispute. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. It was so over the top, so wildly detached from reality. It read more like a screenplay than a lawsuit. Still, I took it seriously. I called my cousin, who happened to be a real estate attorney in the next town over, and forwarded him the paperwork. His exact words were, "This thing wouldn't survive 5 minutes in front of a judge, but if she wants to dance, we'll dance." What Beatrice didn't know was that my grandfather had left me more than just land. He left me an ironclad property file, one I'd kept in a fireproof safe for years. And it was a copy of an old, still active easement clause. It had been recorded back when his ranch stretched across what was now half the subdivision. The clause gave the landowner, me, permission to move livestock and equipment through any of the parcels that used to be part of the ranch, including Beatrice's lot. Technically, it included dogs, and technically, it was still enforceable. The next HOA meeting was scheduled the night before the dog event. This time, the room was standing room only. Beatrice arrived in a cream pantsuit, heels clicking like gavel strikes. She carried a binder thick enough to bruise, flanked by a man I assumed was her lawyer. I came in calm, collected, and carrying my grandfather's file. When it was my turn to speak, I laid out everything. Easement clause, legal permissions, power sabotage report, and the neighbors' testimonials. I played the audio of Beatrice yelling at her guests on my lawn, and then I played the voicemail she'd accidentally left me last week, where she could be heard bragging to someone about shutting down that mutt parade. When I finished, the lawyer leaned over and whispered something to Beatrice. Her face twisted, and for the first time, she looked worried. "Mr. Henderson stood up and cleared his throat. "Given what we've seen here, the board will need to meet privately to discuss disciplinary action. But I will say this, the pattern is clear, and the misuse of HOA resources is deeply troubling." Beatrice stood up and tried to object, but the lawyer pulled her gently by the elbow. She sat down, fuming. As I walked out of the meeting hall, 3 different neighbors stopped me to offer help for the dog event. One even brought over a spare canopy and tables. The support was rolling in faster than I expected. The yard was clean, the weather forecast was clear, and Moose and Pip had been bathed and brushed like they were heading to a dog show. Beatrice's attempt to burn the barn down had only managed to make me fireproof. By sundown the day before the event, the lawn was aglow with string lights and stacked with donation boxes. The camera crew was confirmed. The shelter team was bringing 20 dogs, including a few in wheelchairs and a 3-legged lab named Clyde. And in the quiet moments before sleep, I looked out over the lawn and thought about how strange it was that a buffet table could set off a war and how satisfying it was to know the final course hadn't been served yet. The morning of the event dawned crisp and golden, with a light breeze rustling the trees and a warmth that promised a perfect day. I stood at the edge of the driveway, sipping coffee while watching a volunteer crew set up the tents and tables across the lawn. Moose sat beside me, tail sweeping the porch with slow approval, while Pip darted from one station to the next like an over-caffeinated usher. The bounce house was swapped for an agility course, the buffet for a dog treat bar, and the DJ replaced by a teenage violinist who played calm background tunes. It was everything Beatrice's chaos wasn't, and the best part was that it was all real, no drama, no stage perfection, just good people doing good things with their dogs by their side. By 10 a.m., Families were arriving with leashed pets and curious expressions. Some brought donations, others came to adopt, and quite a few had simply heard the buzz and wanted to see what all the fuss was about. The camera crew from Channel 7 showed up an hour later and began filming interviews. They spoke to volunteers, shelter workers, and even one of the elderly women from the community who brought handmade dog bandanas for the cause. Every few minutes, someone would ask if they could meet the dogs from the video, the infamous duo that turned a bridal buffet into a battlefield. I introduced Moose and Pip like they were royalty, and the crowd responded accordingly. Moose posed with toddlers like a fluffy statue, while Pip performed tricks for treats, basking in the spotlight like she was born for it. Just after noon, I noticed the crowd begin to part. Heads turned, whispers spread, and then there she was, Beatrice. She appeared like a rain cloud at a picnic, dressed in a pastel suit and oversized sunglasses, walking with clipped steps as if each inch of grass offended her. A few people turned away, a few stared, and the rest just watched. I expected her to storm over to the nearest camera or yell at a volunteer, but instead, she stood by the sidewalk, arms crossed, staring at the crowd as if she couldn't decide whether she was furious or jealous. She didn't approach me, not yet. Instead, she flagged down a reporter, and I saw her lean in to whisper something. The reporter nodded, listened politely, and then moved on without using a single word she said. Beatrice stood there a moment longer before turning her gaze back toward the lawn. And that was when Clyde, the three-legged lab, bounded up to her with a tongue-lolling smile and a bright orange vest reading, "Adopt me." The poor dog must have mistaken her for someone kind. Beatrice shrieked and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own heels as she demanded someone remove the mutt. A volunteer stepped in and guided Clyde away, apologizing to the dog instead of her. People had seen it. Cameras, too. Beatrice's tantrum was no longer a neighborhood myth. It was now part of the footage that would air that night across half the county. She must have realized it, too, because she vanished shortly afterward, her departure as cold and fast as her entrance. I let her go without a word. There was no need to humiliate her further. She had done a flawless job of that on her own. By mid-afternoon, the donation bin was overflowing. 3 dogs had already been adopted. 2 more had applications pending, and the news crew caught a perfect shot of Pip catching a frisbee midair while Moose high-fived a group of kids. Sarah Jenkins brought homemade lemonade. Michael Davies manned the grill, and even Linda, the HOA secretary, stopped by to shake my hand and drop a $20 in the tip jar. It felt like the neighborhood had been holding its breath for months, maybe years, waiting for someone to finally stand up to the chaos. And now that it had happened, they exhaled in the best way possible, with community, compassion, and a whole lot of laughter. As the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting a soft amber glow over the yard, Jessica handed me a folded envelope. Inside was a thank you card with paw prints inked along the bottom and a note saying the shelter wanted to make the event an annual tradition. She wrote that her niece had finally told her mother the truth about the buffet invasion and that Beatrice was taking a step back from event planning indefinitely. Apparently, the HOA had quietly asked her to relinquish her committee roles after reviewing the complaints, footage, and the attempted lawsuit that went absolutely nowhere. The phrase used was a breach of community trust. That night, once everything was packed up and the volunteers had gone home, I sat on the porch with Moose and Pip curled at my feet. The yard was messy but peaceful, the kind of calm that comes only after a storm has passed and left behind nothing but fresh air and the scent of cut grass. I thought back to the first day I'd seen Beatrice's buffet table set up like she owned the place, how surreal it felt to see strangers carving roast beef on my lawn. I remembered the sting of disbelief, the mess, the chaos. And then I remembered the laughter, the support, and the sound of children cheering on a dog in a bandana. Beatrice had tried to bury me in paperwork and pettiness. She had lied, bullied, and tried to spin the truth like she was the main character in a show no one else had signed up for. But in the end, it wasn't fury or revenge that beat her. It was joy. Joy, and a pair of dogs who had no idea they were at the center of a suburban revolution. As stars blinked into the sky, I raised my glass to the quiet, to Pip's twitching dreams and Moose's sleepy sigh, to neighbors who finally spoke up, to community done right, and to the buffet table that started it all. The next day, someone left a basket on my porch. It had a bottle of cider, a note that simply said, "Thank you for standing your ground," and a dog toy shaped like a roast chicken. Pip claimed it immediately. Moose didn't mind.